All right, I'm good on Indiana. Done talking about Indiana. I want to move on to the Detroit Lions. I want to move nationally. Let's talk about the NFL again. I don't think it's the year of the Detroit Lions anymore. I don't think it's the Detroit Lions year. I don't think they're winning the Super Bowl, and I don't think that they're one of the top teams that we can consider capable of that. They may represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. They may not, but they may go to the Super Bowl. I just don't think that they're winning a championship this year. And I hate to say that. Do not get me wrong, all right? I love the Detroit Lions. They're so much fun. They deserve a ring. The fan base deserves it more than anyone. They've never won a Super Bowl. And then, draft Matthew Stafford. They have this opportunity with Matthew Stafford for years, and they come up empty after that stretch. Ship him off, bring Jared Goff in. We thought the Lions were trending back downwards. They weren't. They ended up playing their best football that they've played, arguably, ever. The injuries are piling up, though. The Lions, I just don't think now is the time. I don't think this year is the year. I feel, to a different degree, I feel similarly about the Lions as I do about the Texans. I consider the Texans a Super Bowl contender at the beginning of the year. I'm sure I wasn't the only one. In terms of the general consensus, they weren't necessarily expected to make that happen. They weren't expected to get to that point. But the Texans, as soon as they started suffering the injuries that they did, Nico Collins went down, Tank Dell is now out for the season, Stephon Diggs is out. And the Texans have just been falling off the rails a little bit. Now they're 9-7, limping to a division title. They'll host a playoff game. They probably won't do much after that, even if they do manage to win that game in the wild card. The Texans, we went from thinking they could elevate to an AFC Championship appearance, maybe an AFC Championship victory, maybe a contender in the AFC to knock off the Chiefs. And then they started suffering injuries, and now we consider this to be a lost season, and we just are going to have to recharge and retool for next year. The Lions, I feel similarly about. Yes, they are still 14-2 with an opportunity to be 15-2. Yes, they are still in the front, in the driver's seat for the number one seed in the NFC. But like I said, these injuries are piling up. They have 4 linebackers on IR. They have had 4 linebackers on IR for the second half of the season. David Montgomery and Khalif Raymond, 2 big-time offensive pieces, were out in their game against the 49ers. Terrion Arnold was out with an illness as well. And that impacted the defense significantly, right? The second level of the defense has been absolutely decimated. The front 7 isn't exactly doing well in terms of health either. Now, somehow the Lions are still staying afloat. Somehow they've still been picking up quality wins, and that's a huge testament to Dan Campbell, this entire coaching staff, and this entire front office for putting together a roster deep enough to not only survive this amount of injuries, but thrive with this amount of injuries. I'm just saying I don't think they're going to win a Super Bowl, right? I don't think it's their year as we were potentially thinking of it as just a few weeks, a few months ago, right? They're weak on defense, and they don't quite have the star power on offense right now to compensate for that. David Montgomery has been out. Khalif Raymond has been out. This team has been in and out of injuries all year long, right? What I saw against San Francisco last night, it was Monday Night Football. I believe it was in San Francisco. It was this Lions-49ers matchup, rematch of the NFC Championship from last season, except with way lower stakes because it effectively didn't matter to the Lions. This Vikings game with Sunday Night Football is consequential no matter what. And the 49ers are out of playoff contention. But the defense, particularly the secondary for the Lions, was suffering, and it was suffering bad, right? San Francisco threw for 400 yards. Purdy was routinely hitting open receivers in space at a 77% completion rate. A 49ers team that really has struggled to put points up on the board this season was running it up on the Lions. They put up 34 total. The last time the 49ers scored over 30 points this season, they were playing the Chicago Bears, right? Kirby Joseph was the one bright spot of the defense. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I want to go back to that point, right? The last time the 49ers scored over 30, they had 38 against the Chicago Bears. Again, I'm not comparing the Lions to the Bears. I'm not saying that the Lions are as bad of a team as the Bears are. I'm not saying the Bears are as good of a team as the Lions are. I'm just saying that if that's the kind of performance the Lions are having against the 49ers in Week 17, because of all these injuries, it's no knock on any other aspect of the Detroit Lions. I don't think they're going to be capable, or at least firmly capable, of going on and winning a Super Bowl. Kirby Joseph was the one bright spot. He had 2 interceptions in the second half of this one. He really kept the Lions alive. And although you can't ignore those plays and you can't ignore those takeaways and those turnovers, if they hadn't occurred, the 49ers probably don't win this, or the 49ers probably win this game, right? The Lions probably don't survive this one. Detroit, as a result, relied on explosive plays on defense to stay alive against the San Francisco 49ers, who have 6 wins on the year, and it's week 17, right? My question to you is, what happens in the playoffs, right? What happens against higher quality QBs, higher quality offenses? What happens when Detroit, at the end of the day, is faced with someone like Jalen Hurts or faced with Saquon Barkley, perhaps, on the ground? What happens when they're faced with Sam Darnold on Sunday Night Football just next week? And even if they make it out of the NFC, even if the Lions in the NFC is objectively weaker than the AFC right now, even if they make it out of the NFC, what happens in the Super Bowl? Even if they get to the Super Bowl, what happens when you have to play Patrick Mahomes? What happens when you have to play Josh Allen, right? What happens when you have to play some of those, Lamar Jackson, right? Some of those top-tier players in the AFC, those top-tier quarterbacks in the AFC, and those high-octane offenses in the AFC. I just don't think the Lions right now are healthy enough to be built to stop those offenses and to slow down those quarterbacks. That's what I saw from the San Francisco game, because if San Francisco is running all over and running right through this Detroit Lions defense the way they were, I just wonder what would happen if they're playing someone other than Brock Purdy or someone other than the San Francisco 49ers, who are objectively a poor team this year. I wouldn't say a poor franchise. I wouldn't say a poorly run organization or a poor roster. This year, the 49ers are bad. They have 6 wins. And the Lions let the 49ers run all over them. And again, that's a team that's been struggling to score recently this season. The Minnesota game, the game against the Minnesota Vikings later, just next week, the last game of the entire season, Sunday Night Football, that has some massive impacts, right? First of all, it's a battle for the NFC North. It's also a battle for the number 1 seed, meaning the winner of that game gets the 1 seed, the loser gets the 5 seed. It's very, very simple. Both teams are in the playoffs. Both teams are 14-2. They're the 2 best records in the NFC. But if the Lions win, they're the 1 seed. And if the Lions lose, they'll be the 5. So my question to you is, what happens if Detroit loses? They do have that game at home, but that doesn't mean much, right? It means quite a bit. I don't want to discount that. But regardless, it's still very possible the Lions lose, because at the end of the day, they're playing a 14-2 Minnesota Vikings team in a division rivalry game in the biggest game of the year for both teams. If Detroit loses, and I honestly think they will, even at home, they would be the 5 seed in the playoffs. They've been the 1 seed. They've been in the driver's seat the entire season. They would drop at the last second to the 5 seed, even if they execute the week after against an NFC South champion, right? Whether it's the Buccaneers or the Falcons. Even if they get past that team in the playoffs, what happens in the divisional rounds? What happens in the conference championship game? What happens in the next 3 games where you have to go most likely on the road twice and then to the Super Bowl against increasingly better opponents, right? Even if they manage to get past the wild card round, it's a very unfavorable draw to have to go to Minnesota or to Philadelphia in January in the playoffs, and then most likely have to beat both of those teams just to get to the playoffs. That is going to be massively difficult. I honestly don't think the Lions are going to be able to do that, considering how injured they are, particularly on defense. Their Super Bowl window is undeniably open, but it's not going to be open forever, right? It's wide open. The Lions are fully capable of winning a Super Bowl. This could have been their year, but the injuries are just piling up, and I just hope Detroit manages to pull it together and get their ring before this core group of players dissolves and the Super Bowl window softly closes, because that happens quicker than you would think. Pretty soon, the Lions are going to lose some. They're going to run out of money. They're not going to be able to pay everybody. Players get older. Jared Goff is getting older, right? The Lions deserve a championship, and I think they're fully capable of winning it sometime soon. They very well could win it this year. I just don't think so, and I think these injuries are noticeably piling up, and I think that we have evidence of that in that loss to the 49ers last night.